Okay, let's unpack this. We're going to delve into one of the most, I think, persistent, difficult feelings a person can carry.
Yeah.
It's not the usual stress of the day, you know?
Right, or even that sort of understandable anger that might pop up from a conflict.
Exactly. This is different. It's this deep, almost unnamed weight that, well, many of us feel kind of settling beneath the ribs. It's like a quiet, constant hum of maybe indebtedness.
Indebtedness. That's a good word for it. It's the kind of weight that just doesn't follow logic sometimes. The one that can wake you up maybe 3 in the morning, sharp, whispering these variations on the same theme, really.
Yeah, like, you should have stayed.
Mm-hmm.
Or you should have been more understanding,
Yeah.
even. You failed them because you chose a path that made you whole.
Exactly. And we need to be clear, we're not talking about just fleeting regret here, are we?
No, this is really different. This is what we sometimes call sedimentary guilt. It feels like it just settles into your bones,
Yeah.
maybe over decades.
Yeah, like layers building up.
Right. And it often revolves around that really core relationship, the one with your parents, maybe long after the events or even the people themselves have passed. It feels a bit like grief, but the source seems internal, like it's coming from inside you.
Precisely. And if we bring, say, the lens of mindful psychology to this burden, what does that weight actually signify? What's it really telling you underneath it all?
Okay.
Well, the core idea, the core truth, perhaps, is that this feeling isn't some kind of moral verdict on you, and it's certainly not a flaw in your character.
That's a relief to hear, honestly.
It's more like a symptom, a signal, maybe, from the deeper architecture of your mind. And the powerful thing is, we can actually treat it as an invitation.
An invitation. To what, though? It feels more like a prison sometimes.
An invitation, I think, to untangle a really complex knot, a knot of identity. It's a knot that the ego, that part of us that builds our story, has sort of woven together, and it binds us, often unconsciously, to an impossible version of the past.
Impossible how?
A version where we somehow had the power to prevent pain or fix things or make everything okay for our parents. A power, we never actually possessed in the first place.
That knot, it feels so tangible when you put it like that. It's like the story we tell ourselves about the role we were supposed to play in our family, right? Whether we chose it or not.
Exactly right. The ego, that part of the self that's always striving for consistency, for narrative control, really thrives on inheriting and then acting out these pre-written roles.
Like being the dutiful child.
Or the fixer, the family savior, maybe the perpetually misunderstood rebel, or even the chronic disappointment. There are many variations.
Yeah.
And the key insight here is this. When you feel this profound, deep-seated guilt, you're often not actually responding to the real historical events, to what actually happened.
Okay, so what am I responding to then?
You're responding to the story the ego tells about what should have happened. The story where if only you had been better or stronger or maybe just different, things would have turned out okay.
Wow. I think many listeners will instantly recognize that feeling. They feel guilty, not because they actively, harm someone.
Right.
But because they feel they failed to live up to this fantasy self, this imaginary version who could have somehow fixed their parents' entire lives, their sadness, their struggles.
That's precisely the critical insight. Guilt feeds on these incredibly powerful but ultimately unrealistic projections. Just think about the common sentences that run through our minds.
Like what?
I should have made them happy, or I should have sacrificed my own career, my own needs so they wouldn't be lonely, or even I should have somehow healed their old wounds.
Those sound so big, so impossible.
They are impossible. These are fantasies of an idealized self, a kind of a mythical superhero version of you who somehow possessed the emotional capacity, the time, the resources, and the external power to completely manage the complex emotional landscape of another adult human being.
It sounds absurd when you say it like that, but it feels so real.
It does, because it's tied up with love and loyalty.
Yeah. Right. So if someone feels that intense loyalty, that deep love, how do they even begin to draw that line? When you say something like your parents were never your project and their pain was never yours to carry, it sounds incredibly freeing on paper. But in practice, doesn't it risk feeling like cold detachment or even abandonment, like you're just washing your hands of them?
That's a really crucial question, and it speaks right to the heart of this conflict, doesn't it? This idea of radical clarity is so often confused with coldness or indifference.
Yeah.
But I would argue that true love, authentic love, actually requires clarity as its foundation. Think about it. If you try to carry another person's burden, their whole history, their unhealed pain, well, you inevitably collapse under the weight.
And then you're no good to anyone, including yourself.
Exactly. And neither of you really benefits. You end up trying to love them from a place of, well, obligation or duty. And that, over time, tends to breed resentment, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does. Instead of loving from freedom.
Instead of loving from a place of genuine freedom and choice, so the clarity isn't about abandoning them, it's about finding a sustainable, authentic way to relate to them and their reality and your own.
Okay, so how does ancient wisdom, perhaps, help us define that boundary, that line between healthy love and, well, damaging obligation?
That's a great place to look. We can turn to, for instance, the Buddhist teaching on karma. It's often cited from the Pali Canon, the earliest texts. There's a line that goes something like, "You are the owner of your karma. You are the heir of your karma."
Karma. Okay, that word carries a lot of baggage in the West, doesn't it? Like fate or cosmic justice or something.
It definitely does, but that's not really the sense it has in these early Buddhist teachings. It's not about fate or some kind of external retribution. It's actually a much more fundamental statement about personal agency and responsibility.
Okay, unpack that for us. What does owner of your karma mean practically, especially in this context of feeling guilty about our parents?
Practically, it means you cannot live another person's life for them. And just as importantly, they cannot live yours, your parents. They had their own struggles, their own conditioning, their own traumas, their own choices, conscious and unconscious.
That's their karma.
In this sense, yes.
Oh.
That's their karma, their psychological inheritance, you could say, their unique stream of actions and consequences. Now, your guilt often comes from this underlying assumption that you somehow had the ability or even the responsibility to step into their stream and redirect its flow.
Like I could have dammed it up or changed its course if I'd just tried harder.
Precisely. Believing you could have saved them or fixed them or made their lives painless, that's fundamentally confusing love with obligation, and it's confusing genuine care with a subtle form of control.
Control? I hadn't thought of it that way.
Love, in this understanding, flows. It accepts the other person as they are, limitations and all. Obligation, on the other hand, is often imposed either by others or by ourselves, and it usually carries an implicit demand or expectation. If I do this, you should change.
Wow. So when I feel that really powerful surge of guilt, that ache,
Yeah.
it might not actually be pure compassion. It might be, in part, a subtle attempt to control the narrative, to make it a story where I could have made a difference, if only.
That's often a huge component of it, yes.
Yeah.
You're subtly, maybe unconsciously trying to control their outcome, or at least the meaning of their outcome. You're clinging to the belief, however faint, that if you just sacrifice enough of your own energy, your own well-being, your own soul maybe, then the tragedy of their life or their pain could somehow be averted or redeemed.
But that's a fundamentally impossible task, isn't it? It even sounds a bit arrogant when you put it like that, trying to rewrite someone else's life.
It is impossible. And yes, there's a subtle arrogance in assuming we have that kind of power over another person's entire existence. It stems from a good place, love, connection, but it gets distorted.
Yeah.
And this clinging, this impossible task leads us perfectly into the next really fascinating layer of this complexity. Why on earth do we cling so tightly to guilt, even when our rational mind knows better, even when we know it's impossible?
Right. Okay, here's where it gets really interesting for me. Because I can sit here, I can intellectually understand, okay, I couldn't have fixed my father's decades-long struggle with loneliness. I get it on one level. And yet, the moment I think about it or a memory pops up, that guilt still lands with this tremendous psychic weight. It's heavy. So why do we defend a feeling that causes us so much pain? Why does the ego hang on to it?
It's a fantastic question, and the answer is deeply counterintuitive, but psychologically very powerful. The ego, that storyteller part of us, actively clings to guilt, because guilt provides perhaps the single most comforting psychological mechanism available to us in the face of unavoidable suffering.
Comforting guilt. How?
It provides the illusion of agency, the illusion of control.
Okay, explain that connection. Feeling bad makes you feel powerful. That seems completely backwards.
It is the most seductive psychological trap there is. Think about it. If I tell myself deep down, I am guilty for what happened, what am I implicitly saying?
That I did something wrong. That I failed.
Yes, but more fundamentally, you're saying, I had an effect. My actions mattered. I had power in that situation. If I had power, then the difficult childhood, the parents' unhappiness, the distance, the unresolved conflict, it must have been avoidable.
Right?
If I had power, I could have changed it.
Exactly. And if it was voidable, it means the world isn't just chaotic and random. It means the world is potentially orderly, predictable, and crucially, maybe still fair, if only I'd done the right thing.
Wow. Okay. So guilt is actually a kind of psychological defense mechanism. It protects us from facing the truly terrifying reality
Which is,
that life is sometimes chaotic and unpredictable and painful, and we are often fundamentally powerless in the face of another person's deep suffering or their life choices.
spot on. You've nailed it.
Yeah.
Psychologically speaking, it is profoundly easier for many of us to cast ourselves as the bad guy who screwed up, the one who made the wrong choices.
And to accept being the powerless good guy. Then to accept being the powerless person who is simply doing their best, or even just surviving within a situation that was inherently flawed, or difficult, or imperfect, or maybe just incredibly complex. To release the guilt, then, isn't just about forgiving yourself. It requires something much deeper.
What's that?
We must surrender the fantasy, the deeply held, often completely unconscious fantasy, that somehow, with just a little more patience or a bit more love or one more sacrifice, we could have magically rewritten history. We could have transformed our parents into the idealized, perfectly attuned figures we needed them to be.
The fantasy is so strong. The if only I had. It feels like it could still be true, even though the past is gone.
That clinging to the if only, that constant mental rehearsing of how the past could have been different, you could see it as a form of, well, subtle violence against reality itself.
Violence against reality. That's powerful, because reality is just what happened.
It is. We are actively, energetically fighting the unchangeable facts of the past. And this internal fight, this refusal to accept what was, is often rooted in the ego's most seductive lie of all. We could call it the transactional lie.
The transactional lie. Does that mean the belief that love is some kind of negotiation?
Yeah.
Like if I give this, I should get that back?
Precisely. We are culturally, maybe even biologically, programmed to believe deep down that relationships operate on a kind of cause and effect basis, especially love. If I just give enough, sacrifice enough of my time, my energy, my own identity perhaps, then surely the other person will finally soften, they'll change, they'll appreciate me, they'll truly see me.
And that belief is what fuels decades of guilt-driven behavior, isn't it? Making choices based on trying to get that response.
Absolutely. We keep pulling the lever on the sacrifice machine because we desperately believe there must be a mechanism. My pain, my self-denial, my continued effort must eventually equal their healing, their recognition, their love.
Love isn't a machine, is it? It doesn't operate on transaction like that.
True love, authentic connection. It's fundamentally a state of being, not a strategy. It's given freely when it's genuine without demanding a specific return or outcome. The transactional mindset turns love into a tool, a lever we try to use to manipulate reality.
Okay. And when you finally realize that lever doesn't actually exist, or at least it doesn't work the way you thought, when you truly accept that all your sacrifice maybe didn't produce the result you craved, that's when the ground feels like it just falls away beneath you.
Yes. That's often a moment of profound disorientation, maybe even despair.
That must be the terrifying freedom you mentioned earlier.
That's exactly it, the terrifying freedom of uncertainty. You step out of the script, out of the transactional game. You step into a space where you have to acknowledge the hard, maybe heartbreaking truth. I could not fix them. I cannot control their emotional state or the narrative of their life, past or present. You have to let go of the outcome.
That sounds scary, but also potentially liberating.
Both. It's scary because it means letting go of the illusion of control. But it's liberating because it frees up enormous amounts of energy that were previously spent fighting reality. And that uncertainty, that vast open space of acknowledging, I don't know and I can't fix it, that is precisely where true non-transactional compassion has room to begin.
Compassion born from acceptance, not from expectation or trying to change things.
Exactly. Compassion for them as they are, and crucially, compassion for yourself and your own limitations.
Okay.
Yeah.
But understanding all this, these psychological dynamics, the insight, the vipassana as you called it, and it feels like it only takes us so far, right? I can intellectually grasp the transactional lie, I can see the illusion of control, but the moment I revisit a difficult memory, or even just feel that familiar pang of guilt, the physical sensations are right back. That knot in the stomach, the tightness in my chest, maybe a burning feeling. How do we move past just the analysis phase? How do we get to true physical release?
You're pointing to something absolutely critical, that quiet truth. Insight alone is insufficient for liberation. Understanding might illuminate the suffering. It can show us the map of the territory, certainly. But illumination by itself is not liberation. It doesn't automatically change the feeling.
Right. The physical feeling of the guilt often feels deeper, more stubborn, more persistent than the specific thought that might have triggered it.
It absolutely is, because it's become embodied.
So if insight is the map,
Mhm.
what's the actual journey itself? How do we walk the path?
Liberation, real change, requires that insight meets deep presence, embodied presence. In Buddhist terms, vipassana needs to be balanced with samadhi, which is often translated as concentration or stable presence. We have to, at some point, stop the endless analysis of the pain, the ceaseless mental dissection of the narrative of, I should have, if only,
And start doing what instead?
and start simply feeling it directly, in the body, without judgment, without trying to fix it immediately. We have to learn to welcome that feeling of guilt, not as an enemy invasion or a mathematical problem to be solved, but perhaps more like a temporary guest. A difficult guest, maybe, but one we can learn to simply observe with kindness.
Wow. Okay, welcoming the guilt. Many people, myself included, find that idea terrifying. There's a fear, isn't there, that if you stop analyzing the story, if you stop trying to manage it mentally, you'll just drown in the raw physical discomfort and that somatic bodily experience of it.
That fear is completely natural and understandable because, as you said, the guilt loop isn't merely an emotional or mental event. It's intensely somatic. It literally lives in your physical body. Just think about where you tend to hold it.
For me, shoulders are always tense, like I'm bracing for something.
It will.
Definitely a knot in the gut.
Very common. Tensed shoulders, perpetually braced for impact, maybe a tight jaw. That perpetual knot in the stomach that never quite seems to relax no matter what. It's lodged there. And modern neuroscience actually confirms this link very clearly.
How so?
When we endlessly ruminate on these past events, these regrets, these should-haves, we actually activate the amygdala, the brain's threat detector. And we trigger the release of the same stress hormones, cortisol, adrenaline, as if the original stressful event were happening right now in this moment.
So you're not just remembering the past.
Your nervous system is actively physiologically reliving the threat, or the perceived failure, or the sense of danger or disconnection associated with that past event.
Whoa, okay, so my body right now could be physically responding to a threat or a situation that actually ceased to exist maybe 10, 20, even 30 years ago.
Precisely. The mind knows it's over, perhaps, but the body hasn't received the memo. It hasn't gotten the all-clear signal. It's still stuck in that protective, contracted posture.
So how do we send that memo? How do we tell the body it's safe now?
We have to address it on the body's terms, which means using presence, sensation, and breath. And one profound technique for shifting this stuck somatic relationship comes from Tibetan Buddhism. It's the practice of Tonglen.
Tonglen. I've heard of it. It translates as giving and taking, right?
That's right, giving and taking. And it's an act of radical, courageous reorientation towards difficult feelings like guilt.
Okay. How does Tonglen work specifically with this kind of deep, sticky parental guilt? Because honestly, the idea of breathing in the bad feeling, it seems really counterintuitive, maybe even overwhelming, like you just get swamped by it.
That is the precise challenge, isn't it? And it's also the moment of profound courage in the practice. We have spent our whole lives, most likely, being taught implicitly or explicitly to push the guilt away, to numb it, distract ourselves from it, rationalize it, or talk ourselves out of it.
Yep, standard procedure. Avoid unpleasantness.
Tonglen asks us to do the exact opposite. On the in-breath, you consciously, intentionally breathe in the full spectrum of that guilt. You don't just think about it conceptually, you allow yourself to feel its actual texture in your body.
What does that mean? Feel its texture.
Notice the physical sensations associated with it. Is it tightness, heat, hollowness, a specific ache? Notice the internal voice, the one that says you owe them or you failed. You gently, willingly welcome it all in with the breath, knowing, crucially, that it's already present anyway. You're just not fighting it anymore.
That sounds incredibly confronting, just letting it in.
It is confronting, but here's the alchemy. By accepting it fully, by breathing it in without resistance, you stop feeding the internal struggle, you stop fighting the energy that's already there, and then the magic happens on the out-breath.
What happens to that?
On the out-breath, you breathe out compassion. You consciously send out kindness, spaciousness, relief. Now, here's a key point. Often when we think of compassion in this context, we think of sending it to our parents. And while that can be valuable,
It can also keep the focus outside ourselves, right? Still trying to fix them.
exactly. So in Tonglen, for this kind of guilt, the primary focus of the out-breath compassion is often directed towards the younger self. The child or adolescent part of you who deeply believed that love required self-erasure, the part of you that thought survival or belonging meant disappearing or taking responsibility for things that weren't yours.
Ah, So breathing out compassion
Mhm.
for that part of me, for the child who felt they had to carry it all.
Yes. You breathe out kindness, understanding, and release for that younger self. You're essentially reparenting that part of you with the breath.
A simple redirection from trying to manage the external situation or the parent to offering compassion internally. That feels like it shifts the whole dynamic. It moves from feeling like an eternal debt to maybe internal acceptance. It feels like a moment of mercy for myself.
Mindfulness in this practice becomes the purest form of mercy. Because when you learn to just sit with the guilt gently, without labeling it bad or wrong, without needing to immediately get rid of it, you start to discover its true nature.
Which is,
It's not a permanent stone embedded in your soul, as it sometimes feels. It's more like water, or maybe dense fog. When it's simply held gently, bathed in the light of non-judgmental awareness, it begins to shift. Water eventually finds its way home, fog eventually lifts. The tight grip dissolves not because you forced it to, but because you stopped struggling against it. You realize its power, its charge, relied entirely on your resistance and your fearful attention.
okay, that makes a lot of sense. Stopping the struggle, that brings us towards integration, right? We've explored the insight, we've touched on the presence practice like Tonglen. How do we take these pieces, the understanding and the embodied practice, and actually build a new way of being, a way forward?
Yes, integration is key. Let's start with a powerful analogy that sometimes helps people visualize this process: the dissolving letter. Imagine you took the time to write it all down. Every apology you feel you owe, every explanation you wish you could have given, every plea for understanding you never voiced, every ounce of energy you've invested in feeling guilty or trying to make amends. You write it all down in a long letter, maybe to your parent, living or deceased.
Getting it all out.
Getting it all out. Then you take that letter, fold it, and place it gently into a bowl of clean water. And you just watch. You watch as the ink begins to blur, as the paper starts to soften and lose its structure, as the sharp words dissolve and blend into the water.
So the purpose here isn't necessarily to forget the past or pretend the pain didn't happen.
Not at all. Forgetting isn't the goal, and often isn't possible or even desirable. The purpose is to consciously stop feeding the echo of the past with your precious present moment attention and energy.
The past itself is fixed. What we're usually living with is the echo, the reverberation.
Exactly. And echoes fade when we withhold the fuel of rumination, when we stop shouting back into the canyon. So the goal becomes what we might call remembering.
Remembering, as in putting the members, the pieces back together.
Precisely. Putting the pieces of your identity, your history, your present self back together, but in a new, healthier, more integrated configuration. You consciously shift from operating as the child who felt bound by inherited duty or unspoken contracts
To operating as an adult.
to operating as an adult who is rooted in present moment awareness, who can look at their history with clarity, and who can make conscious choices about how they relate to that history now.
Which might mean, for instance, figuring out how to genuinely honor our parents' humanity, their struggles, their love, however imperfect, without simultaneously worshiping their wounds or making their pain the central defining feature of our own identity.
That is the fundamental alchemy we're aiming for. Beautifully put.
Right.
And the most critical starting point for this integration, interestingly, often isn't even forgiveness. Forgiveness can feel too big, too loaded, too demanding, especially early on.
Okay, so if not forgiveness, then what? Where do we start?
We start smaller. We start with recognition. Simple, clear-eyed recognition. And there are 3 specific recognitions that can be incredibly grounding.
What are they? Let's hear them.
First, recognize deeply and kindly that you are doing your absolute best with the emotional tools, the psychological resources, the level of awareness, and the external support you had available at that time, not the resources you have now looking back.
Okay. Acknowledge my own efforts and limitations then. That's one.
Second, recognize that fundamentally your parents were also doing the best they could, operating within the limits of their own histories, their own traumas, their conditioning, their awareness, their own unmet needs.
Acknowledging their humanity and imperfection too.
Yeah.
The universality of struggle.
Yes. It moves beyond blame. And the third recognition, which ties back to the transactional lie, recognize that true love, authentic connection in its purest form, it flows like water. It doesn't operate on debt. It doesn't demand repayment or collateral or endless sacrifice to prove its worth. It simply moves. It connects. It is.
Wow. Holding those 3 together, my best effort then, their best effort then, and the free nature of real love.
When you can hold those 3 recognitions simultaneously, gently, in your awareness, the psychological ground that guilt needs to thrive begins to soften. It loses some of its solidity.
But sometimes that guilt still feels like it has a secret agenda. Like it's not just about the past event. What is that intense, lingering, physical, not really trying to tell me it needs, if it's not just about them?
You're pointing towards the guilt mask. It's a very insightful question. Very often, this persistent, deep guilt we feel towards our parents acts as a kind of mask.
A mask for what?
It masks a deeper, often unacknowledged and unexpressed longing within ourselves, a longing for something we deeply needed but perhaps never fully received from them.
Like what kind of longing?
The longing to be truly seen for who we are, the longing to be held emotionally and psychologically, and perhaps most powerfully, the longing to be forgiven or simply accepted for simply existing as we are, imperfections, flaws, messy bits and all.
And because we didn't get that, maybe, we project that need onto them, believing that only their absolution, their approval, their forgiveness can finally heal that wound inside us.
Exactly. We keep looking outside, often to the past, often to people who may no longer be capable or perhaps never were capable of giving us what we needed. We keep replaying the mental tapes, unconsciously hoping to somehow extract that missing piece, that love, that acceptance, that validation that wasn't available back then. We're essentially seeking an external fix for what has become an internal wound.
And that's why just understanding it isn't enough. The integration has to happen inside.
Precisely. And that integration, that healing, occurs most effectively not in the mind endlessly trying to solve the unsolvable puzzle of the past, but in the body, where the echo of that pain, that unmet need, has taken up residence. The body is where the signal needs to change. It needs to be clearly, repeatedly signaled that the original threat, the original dynamic is actually over.
Okay, let's give the listener and myself a really specific, actionable practice for this, for that somatic integration. How do we actually send that all-clear safety signal to the nervous system?
Okay. It requires focused, gentle, repeated effort. The aim is to decouple the lingering physical sensation from the old historical narrative that keeps re-triggering it. So start by consciously recalling, just for a moment, a situation or memory associated with this guilt or tension with a parent.
Okay, got one.
Maybe it was a harsh word exchanged, maybe a profound silence that felt rejecting, maybe just a general feeling of distance or misunderstanding. Now, here is the absolutely critical pivot. Do not replay the story. Don't get caught up in the dialogue, the details, the who said what.
Feel the feeling, the emotional charge.
Just the charge. Exactly, without the story attached. Gently shift your attention to where you feel that charge, that echo in your physical body right now. Be really curious and precise. Is it a sudden clenching low in your belly? A rapid flutter just beneath your ribs? Is it a feeling of heat rising in your chest or face? A familiar tightness in your throat that kind of restricts your breath? Pinpoint the primary physical sensation and just notice it without judgment.
Okay, feeling it, noticing the sensation itself, without the mental commentary of why I feel it or whose fault it is.
Exactly, just the raw sensation. Now, gently direct your breath towards that physical space. Imagine your breath is like warm, deeply compassionate light, or maybe warm honey, and visualize it gently surrounding, softening, and creating a little more space around the edges of that contraction, that tightness, that knot. Hold your attention there, breathing gently into it.
Breathing into the tight spot with kindness.
With kindness. This simple practice does something remarkable physiologically. It helps to stimulate the vagus nerve, which, as we know, is a major player in our nervous system. It runs from the brainstem all the way down through the chest and into the abdomen, and it's key for activating the parasympathetic rest and digest response, the opposite of the fight or flight stress response that guilt often triggers.
So, by consciously breathing into the site of the physical tension,
you are sending a direct nonverbal signal back up to your brain and throughout your nervous system. The signal says, the threat is over, that moment has passed, you are actually safe right now.
and the more we practice that, the more the body's somatic alarm system learns to stand down. The guilt starts to lose its visceral charge.
You are literally building a new internal memory trace. You are proving to your body through direct experience that you are now the primary source of safety, regulation, and acceptance. The guilt begins to resolve itself somatically from the inside out, not because you finally earned forgiveness from the outside or figured out the perfect apology, but because you stopped demanding it from the past and instead offered radical acceptance and kindness to the self you used to be and the self you are now, carrying that echo.
This really does feel like alchemy. Taking this heavy, leaden feeling of guilt, and by holding it mindfully, with presence and breath, transforming it into something else entirely.
It truly is a kind of inner alchemy. Guilt, when held this way, transmutes. It doesn't just disappear, it changes form. It often transforms into deep, grounded compassion. And interestingly, not just compassion for yourself, but also often quite naturally for your parents. And maybe even for the entire messy, beautiful, imperfect human condition.
How does that shift happen, seeing them differently?
When the charge of your own pain decreases, your perspective clears. You begin to look back, perhaps, and see them not solely through the lens of your own childhood needs or wounds. You start to see them more fully, perhaps as fellow human beings who were also wounded.
Not as villains or failures, or even as perfect idols we failed.
Exactly. But maybe just as people carrying their own unhealed pain, their own unmet longings, often inherited directly from their own childhoods and parents. You realize, perhaps with a kind of sad clarity, that they literally did the best they could with the love, the awareness, and the emotional resources they had access to at the time.
But the ego, our storyteller, really fights against that complexity, doesn't it? It wants a simpler story. Villain and hero, right and wrong, perpetrator and victim.
It absolutely does. The ego craves simplicity and certainty. But awareness, mindful presence, resists that simplification. It gently, persistently reveals the deeper, quieter, more complex truth. Mostly, they're just humans. All of us navigating the dense fog of our conditioning, our traumas, our limited perspectives. And in that fog, mistakes are inevitable. Love shows up imperfectly. Goodbyes are often messy or incomplete. Hearts get broken.
And maybe that's not a tragedy that needs constant fixing or judgment.
Maybe it's simply the texture of being alive, the curriculum of being human.
Okay, if we zoom out even further now and connect this to the bigger picture, this burden we carry, this specific kind of deep familial guilt that seems to bind us so tightly to our family history, sometimes it feels almost generational, like it's too large, too pervasive, to be entirely personal just to me.
I believe it absolutely is often ancestral, or at least deeply interwoven with generational patterns. This guilt, this sense of unspoken obligation or inadequacy, it's frequently the echo of generations past. Generations who profoundly believed, perhaps out of necessity or cultural norm, that love required immense sacrifice or silence or unquestioning obedience.
So our parents were maybe just passing on what they received?
Very often, you can think of them, as one metaphor goes, like vessels, perhaps cracked, yes, maybe leaking, maybe not perfectly shaped. But they were still carrying the water of life, the patterns of relating, the beliefs about love they received from their parents, and trying to pass it on to you.
And now it's in my hands.
And now you hold this extraordinary power, right now. Through your own presence, your growing awareness, your willingness to feel and transform these patterns within yourself, you have the capacity to break that chain. You can choose consciously not to pass that same unhealed pain, that same impossible expectation, that same burden of guilt forward to the next generation, or even just perpetuate it within your own life.
Wow, that feels significant. So the astonishing result of letting go then, it isn't just about finding some kind of quiet internal peace for myself.
Although that's a worthy goal.
Right. But it actually allows the present to heal itself in a way. When I stop mentally rehearsing old arguments or trying to win battles that ended decades ago, when I stop measuring my self-worth against that impossible, idealized standard of filial perfection,
You discover you were never actually meant to be the savior, or the fixer, or the perfect child. That was never your job. The moment you stop trying to fix the past, which is impossible anyway, the present stops demanding that exhausting performance from you. It frees up so much energy.
and this maybe brings us to something you touched on earlier, this profound paradox that seems to undercut a lot of conventional self-help advice. You said maybe forgiveness wasn't actually the ultimate goal here.
Yes, let's explore that because it can feel quite radical.
It does seem enormously counterintuitive. Why wouldn't forgiveness be the goal? Isn't that what healing is all about?
Well, conventional forgiveness, as it's often understood, still operates within a framework of right and wrong. It implies there was a profound wrong committed, a debt incurred, that must first be acknowledged, then somehow absorbed or processed, and then consciously released. It keeps the focus very much on the past transaction, the injury.
Okay, I see that. It's still centered on the wrong.
True liberation, however, the kind that arises from deep presence and mindful awareness, it might lie in realizing something even deeper. Perhaps forgiveness in that transactional sense was never truly needed. Because maybe, when seen with enough clarity and compassion, there was no fundamental wrong in the absolute sense, only human beings doing their very best within the severe limitations of their awareness, their conditioning, their own pain.
It's like moving beyond judgment altogether. Radical compassion bypasses the need for the judgment inherent in forgiveness.
That's the possibility, yes. It's a compassion so vast it doesn't need to forgive because it understands the roots of the actions came from suffering, not malice. It sees the whole tangled web.
Okay, so if that's the case, the most radical act of healing isn't necessarily seeking or granting forgiveness related to them, living or dead.
What might it be instead?
It's realizing that the apology, the acceptance, the validation I was perhaps desperately seeking from them, I actually needed to give that to the self I used to be. The child who felt responsible, burdened, unseen.
Precisely. You might spend your entire life waiting for the apology or the understanding you feel you deserved from them. And it may never come, but the wait can end. It can end the very moment you consciously, intentionally decide to give that acceptance, that validation, that deep seeing to yourself.
That's how you forge a new identity.
That's how you forge a new identity, not primarily as the child of your parents, defined forever by what you feel you owe them or failed to do for them, but as a conscious, awake participant in your own life, defined by your own awareness, your own choices now. And sometimes making that shift real requires a moment of conscious, maybe even audible, self-declaration.
Okay, let's give the listener and ourselves that moment, a chance to really internalize this shift, this new identity.
All right. If it feels right for you listening, maybe place a hand gently on your heart. Just feel the physical center of your being. Feel the echo of that weight you've carried for so long. Acknowledge it with kindness. And now, perhaps softly or just internally, say these words for yourself, for that younger self who tried so hard, and for the whole ancestral cycle you are choosing to shift. I see you. I truly see your struggle, your effort, your pain. I honor it. And I release you now from the impossible burden of having to be perfect for them, for me, for anyone. You did the best you could. It is enough.
Breathing, that feels powerful, like shifting something deep inside. It moves us beyond just obligation, doesn't it? Into something like spiritual maturity, maybe?
It does. It's a profound shift. So if we connect this now back to the bigger picture, how does this whole journey change our understanding of that weight we started talking about, that feeling beneath the ribs?
Yeah, what is it now?
It means that the weight, that persistent feeling we've called guilt, it doesn't necessarily have to vanish completely, but it can eventually become more like a companion, perhaps a reminder of our interconnectedness and our past, rather than a crushing, defining burden. And that shift happens once we stop struggling against it, once we understand its deeper message.
And we realize the guilt was never really about a literal debt owed to our parents.
Exactly. It was fundamentally about our own deep, primal human longing. The longing to belong to life itself, to love, and maybe most fundamentally, to our own authentic self.
And the ego, our storyteller, took that pure tenderness, that innate desire for connection and belonging, and somehow twisted it into this story of a lifelong debt, an unpayable obligation.
It did. Because the ego understands transactions better than pure presence. But awareness reclaims that tenderness. It reclaims it as devotion. Not devotion to a painful or idealized past necessarily, but fierce, gentle devotion to the raw, imperfect, complex truth of now.
And that's the quiet miracle of awareness, isn't it?
Yeah.
It transforms our relationship to time itself.
Beautifully said. The past was never actually your prison. It just felt like it. Looked at differently, it was simply your teacher. A hard teacher sometimes, but a teacher nonetheless. And your guilt was never truly your enemy. It was just the part of you, deep down, that still desperately believed love had to be earned, that it came with conditions attached, that you weren't inherently worthy of it.
And now, knowing all of this, having unpacked it, we can consciously choose a different relationship with that feeling when it arises.
Now you stand at the edge of the river. Metaphorically speaking, you've been carrying this heavy stone, this stone of guilt, your story, your regrets, your if-onlys. You've carried it for so long. Perhaps you even forgot that the weight wasn't actually yours by birthright. It was something you picked up along the way. And now, maybe you lift it one final time, you feel its familiar, heavy edges, you acknowledge its presence, its history in your life, and then, with intention, with kindness, you release it. You let it drop into the flowing water of the present moment. You watch it sink, perhaps without a sound, absorbed by the current. The river flows on, unimpeded.
And you, standing there on the shore.
And you, standing there, feel profoundly lighter. Not because you erased the past, but because you finally understood the simple, liberating truth. You were never actually meant to carry that stone forever.
The practice of living consciously, lighter. It starts right now with this breath.
Go gently with yourself. Speak kindly, especially to that younger part of you, the one who might have spent decades believing that love meant disappearing or performing or being perfect. That child, that younger self, is still inside you listening, waiting to be seen and held with the compassion you now know how to offer.
And the question then, the invitation that lingers, the one for you to carry forward from this deep dive,
Yeah.
is this.
What will you carry now?